Hello all, hope you're doing well today. A key theme on this channel is as the West starts to crumble, the liberal dream will start to crumble with it because it really built on illusory foundations. People will lurch back to their root level identities when things start to fall apart. Now we're seeing this across the board in the Western world at the moment, and the latest to go in this direction is the journalist Melanie Phillips. You may remember her, I think she wrote for the Daily Mail or something. Well, anyways, many of you I'm sure know she's quite a proud Zionist Jew, but she's been stating recently that her Jewish identity now must come first above being British.
To fight, you need to know and love your identity. Israel gets it. Now, diaspora Jews need also to realize you are not just Americans with Judaism added on. In Britain, they're not just British Jews with Judaism added on. They are part of the British people, you are part of the Jewish people and the Jewish nation, and that should come first. First and foremost, you are Jews. Everything else is secondary.
Now, to be clear, I don't care if Melanie Phillips thinks she's a Jew first, nor do I care if Muslims think they're Muslim first over whatever identity. I mean, what do we expect them to do? Choose Tony Blair over the Prophet Muhammad? It's just not going to happen. The reality is human beings tend to organise in groups that have ethno-cultural and religious components. Maybe you could say that's undesirable, but there's no doubt it's the reality of human societies. It's only really in the past few decades after the liberal revolution we're supposed to live in this post-identity world, at least the Western people or other people are allowed to keep their identities, because as we've explored many times, the reality is behind all this lovey-dovey liberalism is just the raw reality of money power. It wants to have divided nations that can't have a unified voice so its power can go global. And again, many leftists jump on board with this multicultural project because they think they're fighting the power, killing in the name of, yeah. In reality, of course, they're just useful idiots for the system. And this is why they have to hammer down on the Westerner specifically to not notice the trick that's going on. Now, we all know if you say such things in the modern world, you're apparently, full of hate. You've been kidnapped by the spectre of evil. However, genuinely speaking, I really don't hate anybody. I don't really bear any innate animosity. Why would I? In fact, I like to see differing peoples embracing their traditions. I think there's something natural and even beautiful about it. What's always bugged me is why is it such a problem when the Europeans do it? When we do it, all of a sudden we're apparently so bloodthirsty and violent, we have to embrace eternal, mass, atomized individualism forever while celebrating other people's identities to prove we're not evil incarnate. You may have noticed that this is a contradiction in terms. We're supposed to believe in equality and celebrate everybody's identity, but the Europeans aren't allowed one, apparently, because we'll all turn into maniacal Nazis, apparently.
It is as if we are living through a posthumous victory of both Stalin and Hitler. Why has this happened? There are many reasons, complicated. Holocaust guilt by the West is part of it. The idea that they can never again have the reality of the Jew as victim. They have to cast the Jew instead as the victimizer to escape their own historic guilt.
Yeah, don't know about that, Melanie. There's no doubt Holocaust guilt going on in Europe. You may have noticed we're all supposed to have it, even if you fought against the Nazis. However, it doesn't seem to me that we turn that guilt into a sense of victimising the Jews. If anything, I think it's the other way around. Europeans aren't allowed an identity because apparently, like I say, we'll all turn into bloodthirsty, crazed Nazis. I'm sorry to do the old switcheroo, I know it's easy and people don't like it, but if a white Christian got up like Melanie Phillips and spoke, to a group of guys in Australia and said, you're all white Christians first before your national identity, do you think that person would see the light of day again? Their career would be completely eradicated. They'd be seen as worse than Hitler, and we all know it. Ironically, it's the rhetoric of people like Phillips that are leading to the rise of figures like Nick Fuentes. People left him on the fringes for a long time, but his message is now appealing because people are sick of being told they're not allowed an identity and are pure evil while having to celebrate everybody else's. Anyway, let's see what else Melanie's got to say.
We have the rise of identity politics based on the hatred of the Western nation state, the hatred of Western culture itself, which has produced for decades an onslaught by Western intellectual elites on the West's core values And the onslaught on the West's core values has meant an onslaught on Judaism, because it is Judaism, although Christianity is, of course, the infrastructure upon which the West is based, but Christianity didn't come from nowhere. One could say Christianity was a Jewish sect that got slightly out of hand.
Yeah, the religion that the Europeans took on, made their own and created the West with, is just a Jewish sect that got out of control, How is this not dehumanising? This is appalling rhetoric.
The values that everybody in the West holds dear, secular or religious, are fundamentally Jewish values, and we're very shy of saying that.
Oof, bloody hell. I think this is very risky rhetoric at a time where many in the Western world are reconsidering their position on Zionism. Remember, we hear this from every angle in the Western world today. Oh, you're nothing, you Europeans. It was really built by the labour of black people, don't you know? No. It was Muslims. They're the ones who gave you Avicenna and algebra, don't you know? No, you shut up. It was Jews who gave you everything you had. I think we're all getting a bit sick of this at this point. Europe and the West was built by Europeans. Yes, there was some migrant labour. Yes, there was some indentured servitude. Yes, there was some Greek philosophy that was kept in the libraries of Baghdad in the 10th century. And yes, there's been some Jewish influence with scientists and academics and so on in more recent centuries. But the vast majority of the West has been built by the Europeans. But I think there are two claims that Phillips made which are particularly egregious. Number one, that Christianity is simply just a deformed version of Judaism. And secondly, that the values of the West are simply Jewish in and of themselves. Now, the obvious flaw in Phillips's point here is that Western culture precedes Christianity and began without having any influence from Judaism, namely in Greek philosophy. Further still, when we see Christianity enter the Western frame, it blends with that Greek philosophy in Rome. To oversimplify things for brevity's sake, you could say that Aquinas is simply Aristotle Christianized and Augustine is simply Plato Christianized. But this leads us to the key question. Is Christianity Jewish in and of itself, in its essence? Well, through the modernist material frame, you'd say, of course it is. It comes from the Jewish tradition, Jesus was born a Jew, and so on. But the modernist material frame is not the Christian frame. The Christian claim is that Christ is God, i.e. transcendent, beyond the material. This is why when some people descend on this channel and don't like the idea of a Western man embracing Christianity, they'll say, you're worshipping a dead Jew. They don't understand that that's not going to bother anybody who really understands this teaching, because they're mistaking the finger for the moon, to use Buddhist language, i.e. they're looking at the material rather than what it points to. Christ's ultimate claim, famously, is that his kingdom is not of this world, i.e. it's not the material, the flesh. It goes beyond even the ethnic layer. This is, of course, why the Gentiles, too, are welcome into Christ, and exactly why he was rejected by the Jewish tradition. We can also answer this through a classic traditionalist frame. This is from Fritjof Schuon. This is in my own study notes here. Quote, "If a new revelation may thus justifiably depreciate religious values of an earlier origin, it is because it is independent of these values and has no need of them, since it possesses equivalent values of its own and is therefore entirely self-sufficient." The point being here that Christianity reached a completely fresh spiritual soil, new wine in new wineskins, to use the biblical terminology, essentially meaning it was a turn away from the covenant of religious law towards a new covenant, which is a more esoteric inner realization of the true universal nature of God. So now we have a fresh basis through which Christianity has evolved through its prior Judaic form. We can see that it then blended with the specifics of the Europeans and Western culture. To quote Schuon again, "Owing to ethnic and other contingencies, the spirit of the religion may require different, though always orthodox, adaptations." Now, this may be relatively new to some viewers because the Judeo-Christian narrative is so dominant in the Western world. You could arguably say that's because of political reasons. But when we look at it through a traditional, spiritual and religious lens, we see that this is actually quite normal. Take, for instance, Islam. Nobody ever says Islam is a Jewish religion, though it is part of the Abrahamic family tree and tradition. They have the same prophets. They have Abraham, who's Ibrahim, obviously. They have Moses, Musa, Jesus, Isa, and so on. The Muslims don't have this hang-up either, because they view the prophetic figures simply as part of the Islamic tradition, Muhammad being famously the last. That's why he's known as the seal of the prophets, marking the end of the Abrahamic prophetic line. I would argue the reason Islam doesn't struggle with these same issues is because it's still more of an alive tradition, although admittedly that is changing as Islam comes face to face with the corrosive effects of modernity, something that's really destroyed Christianity from the inside out, although the upside to that is, as I often say, it could mean we lead to a reawakening a lot quicker. In essence, the point of this video is, I think Zionists like Melanie Phillips are playing a losing game when they try and paint the Christian West as just a deformed version of Judaism, which really gave the West everything it is anyway. Oh, and by the way, you're not allowed an identity either, because you're too evil, bloodthirsty and untrustworthy. I'm sure I speak for one or two of us when I say I'm getting a bit tired of this sort of thing. The reality is I love Christianity, I love Europe, I love the Europeans, I love our expression of God and the practice therein. That doesn't mean I hate other people or traditions. In many senses I respect them, I love learning from them, have many friends of different traditions, but I'd like to keep my own alive, and I'd like to keep Europe vibrant too. I don't think any propaganda from the mainstream is ever going to make me believe that that is evil. As always, these are just my views, friends. Do let me know what you think down below. You can join the Substack as well if you want to get exclusive content, connect with the group, big plans for 2026. Join the spiritual channel, The Sacred Way, down beneath as well. On top of that, got all sorts of courses and so on, so do check those out. Enjoy the rest of your day and take care.